You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a happy Monday to you all. Welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today, continuing to focus on defenses in the NFL, I am ranking the AFC West from worst to first, a division that I think is kind of a tale of two halves. You have the teams at 4-3 and the teams at 2-1, but there is a bit of a split as far as these four teams go, in my opinion. I invite you all to comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your opinions on the defenses. How would you rank them? What do you think of my rankings? Where do you agree and disagree? Anything that maybe I missed or just didn't talk about? I can only fit as much as I possibly can into these. I don't want them to be too long, but feel free to fire away. I love discussing with you all. But we'll start, of course, at the bottom of the division, work our way up to the top. And I took a lot of time making my consideration for who I wanted at 4-3 in this division here. But I ultimately settled on the Los Angeles Chargers at the number 4 spot. And like I said, there was a lot of consideration between what I was going to do at number 4 and at number 3 here, in large part because I do love the Chargers on paper. But I have loved the Chargers on paper defensively for the last few years now, and it has not resulted in anything really great. So I decided this time around, yes, I still love the team on paper. I'm still excited for what 2024 could look like. But until I see proof in the pudding, I'm having a hard time putting them up any higher than at this number 4 spot. Now, obviously, this year could be the year that changes. You, of course, have Jim Harbaugh coming in. He's going to be changing the culture over there in LA. Jesse Minter, his defensive coordinator at Michigan, is going to be the guy that's leading the way on that side of the football here. But this is a group that, despite the amount of talent that they have just had year in and year out, and I know injuries have caused some issues as well, just have not performed to the standard that I think this team should have been able to. In last season, I mean, they finished with the ninth most in points per game allowed, 5th most in yards per game allowed, 7th most in yards per play allowed. There is a lot of work for this defense to do going into this next season to essentially right the wrongs, I would say, of the last few seasons. And I know, again, Justin Herbert missing a decent amount of time last year. Some of these numbers maybe got a little inflated as the team kind of gave up on Brandon Staley, who was probably around a few years too long, in my opinion, and something I had talked about at length here on the podcast. But besides that point, let's dive in and kind of take a look at the team itself and discuss some things that I'm looking at here. In particularly, as far as additions and subtractions go, personnel losses definitely kept to a minimum with the Chargers here. Linebacker Kenneth Murray, probably the biggest name. You could also include Austin Johnson as like another guy as well from the defense departing this offseason. But I do really like the additions that they've made here to kind of mitigate some of the losses we're talking. Now, first one that I want to highlight, Bud Dupree, outside linebacker, pass rusher, a guy who spent some time in Pittsburgh and then took a trip to Atlanta and now finds himself in LA. Dupree's bouncing off of what was a pretty much a comeback type of season for him in 2023. 6.5 sacks, 39 tackles, 8 tackles for loss. That's his best season since 2020, and a big comeback season at that. Now, I will say that this one presents kind of an intriguing option here because Bud Dupree is somebody that when he was in Pittsburgh, I felt he was uber talented. He went to Tennessee for some time, and then things just kind of fell off from there. And then ultimately making his way into Atlanta, it was kind of like a good refreshing moment for him where he was, again, able to bounce back and post some of his best numbers in quite some time. I think without the pressure of him having to be the guy, because of course you have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack as the two guys that are on the outside, your main leading guys, that should benefit Bud Dupree. But also on top of that, with the injury history that we've dealt with Joey Bosa specifically over the last couple of years now, I don't want to say you can guarantee that Bud Dupree is going to see some significant playing time, but to have him as like that third guy between the two, and you could use him as the guy that relieves either one on either side, Bud Dupree is a great option for that. And in the event that, you know, an unfortunate injury does strike, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, he is someone that I feel you could count on to step in and be productive, especially with the way things are kind of shaping up on defense here in LA. Christian Fulton's another guy that you're bringing in here. He's coming off of kind of a down year from Tennessee, but I will say that when you look back to maybe like 2021, there is a lot of promise with what he can do here, and I'm curious to see how he fares in this defense now and how ultimately LA tries to utilize him. When you look at 2021, he had a couple of interceptions, 14 pass breakups, and about a 50% completion percentage when the ball was coming his way. So someone who at a point in time was deemed to be like the future as far as a cornerback was in Tennessee, and now coming over here into LA, I'll be curious to see how he finds a role for himself here. Obviously, and we talked about it, Joey Bosa, being healthy this year is probably what is going to really help decide what this defense can be. Khalil Mack was a wrecking machine last year with 17 sacks, and if we had Joey Bosa playing alongside him and healthy through the duration of the season, you could only imagine what that wrecking crew could have been like. And again, with Bud Dupree now in the fold as the guy to relieve them, I'm expecting sack totals to go up even further this season for the Chargers. It's just a matter of a healthy Joey Bosa. He's played in only 14 games in the last 2 seasons. He's got to stay healthy. That is the biggest thing for this defense, in my opinion, to especially help out the secondary as we go into this year. Another guy to look at here, Atito Ogbonya, who is slated to start per Our Lads on the interior of the defensive front, hasn't played more than 8 games in a season here. Somebody worth keeping an eye on, as he's probably going to see a significant amount of snaps now that Austin Johnson has gone in the fold. So definitely someone else worth keeping an eye on here. But overall, when I look at the Chargers defense, again, on paper, this is one of the most exciting defenses to look at when you're just reading names off of a sheet here. You have guys like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. You have Derwin James at the top of the defense there. Asante Samuel Jr., who is an ascending corner in the league, in my opinion. There is a lot to look at on paper for this defense, but I have been burned by this excitement year in and year out. With a regime change, there's a lot of unknowns now. You don't necessarily know what the pecking order is going to be. Like, yes, there are big names that you can expect to start, but there are some other things that could shift around all over this defense. Maybe someone, steps up and grabs this new scheme a little bit differently. Maybe some of the vets struggle to grab what's going on in the scheme, and some of the younger guys maybe usurp them and steal their starting spot. Like, there's always a bit of an unknown. So with just my past relationship with ranking Chargers defenses a little too high going into the season, and me also kind of, and again, I know Jim Harbaugh has kind of like turned everything to gold that he's touched in his football career, but I'm curious to see how Jesse Minter adjusts to being a defensive coordinator on an NFL team where the roster is far more limited and you're working with fully grown men as opposed to just young, up and coming, not boys, but, very young, impressionable men, and ones that you have a little bit more control over, being that you're at the college level. I'll be curious to see how that adjustment works. I look at this defense as a very high ceiling and a very low floor, very, very volatile type of defense to kind of make a pick with, where I feel like you could probably find them all over the place depending on who you're talking to, but I'm going to settle at Los Angeles at number 4. Now, moving into the number 3 spot, to settle in on what I would call the bottom half of the division here, because again, I do think there's a bit of a split from top and bottom half in this division, and you can hate me for saying that if you want. At number 3, we're looking at the Denver Broncos here, with Vance Joseph back for his 2nd season. When I look at this defense here, now, as far as the secondary goes, you have PS2, fantastic corner, arguably one of the best in the NFL. I definitely think he's in that conversation at 1, 2, or 3. You have at that conversation, but he definitely deserves to be in that discussion. You bring in Brandon Jones, you have PJ Locke, who stepped up last year as well, but you do have a lot of changing going on there. And as far as the rest of the corners go in that secondary, a lot of just kind of, I'm curious to see who's going to be stepping up to the plate to eat up the majority of the snaps there. You have a defensive front that is loaded with potential, in my opinion, and one that I'm actually very excited to see shake out this season here, and we'll get on that in a second. The inside linebacker room is kind of one that I'm a little bit curious about, bit of a mystery in my opinion. I'm not so sure what it's going to look like here. Obviously, Alex Singleton is back, but you have a new addition in the fold as well. This is a defense that I think needs some players to step up at some key positions here, but I will say that when it comes to obviously having Patrick Surtain and a group of pass rushers I'm really excited about, those are the 2 areas I'm not really worried about. But as far as like the middle of the defense goes, kind of curious to see how things unfold here. Obviously, with Justin Simmons still sitting in free agency, Brandon Jones feels like the guy that's coming in. He's going to replace him, and with the way PJ Locke played last year, it sounds like that's going to be the pairing at the top of the defense here. But I do like the addition of Brandon Jones. You get younger at the position. You get a guy who's basically a do-it-all kind of safety. He can play up, he can play back, he can pressure the quarterback if you need him to do so. A good do-it-all type of safety, someone that I think could thrive in this defense. Cody Barton is coming in to replace Josie Jewell, who departed in this past offseason, playing alongside Alex Singleton. This is a 100-tackle guy who's been efficient the last couple of years here. He can struggle in coverage at times. He has a career coverage percentage of 84.8%. 84% completions. So there is a bit of a struggle with him dropping back, but overall he is a solid guy. And again, I think Alex Singleton's going to be the linebacker to kind of take over that room going forward here, and Barton's going to be the nice kind of like Robin to the Batman type of deal. So really looking forward to seeing how that pairing works out, but I'm not necessarily sure how it's going to go, because I was very high on Josie Jewell in Denver, and I was a little disappointed to see him be allowed to walk. I really liked him there. We also have Levi Wallace, who's coming in here, which looks like, I guess he's going to be playing opposite of PS2. He is slated as the corner opposite of him per Our Lads. I don't really know about Levi Wallace at this point here. He's a guy that's been a good serviceable corner, but someone that I thought would have made more of an impact on his last stop, and he's been kind of bouncing around now for a while since leaving Buffalo. So I'm curious to see just how he fares. Playing alongside someone who is as good as Pat Surtain could be huge for him, so I'll be curious to see if that maybe helps up his play a little bit, or just, he benefits from playing alongside one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL at this current moment here. And then you got some fun draftees to be excited about here. I think cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain could end up seeing some pretty solid playing time, but outside linebacker Jonah Ellis, who's going to join a pass rushing group that I'm very excited to discuss here. 16 sacks in 2023 with Utah. I think you have yourself some really intriguing additions that you got during the middle of the draft here in those two guys. Now, the big thing for me that I really want to see is kind of a step forward with the pass rushers on the edge of your defense here. Outside linebacker Baron Browning missed the first 6 games of last season, and he and Jonathan Cooper are currently slated as the starters here, and I think are a intriguing pairing as they combined for 13 total sacks last year, 12 tackles for loss. But you also have guys like Nick Bonito, and like I said, Jonah Ellis, who's coming in with 16 sacks to his name, and Bonito had 8 last year as well. If all of these guys can stay healthy, I think you have yourself one of the deeper group of pass rushers on the edges of your defense in this division here. There is a lot to be excited about. So if you're a Denver fan, I know you know what could potentially be coming from this group here. I just want them all to stay healthy and be able to play together. I know there was a lot of drama with the Chubb situation last year and how that was working itself out. But now that you know that these 4 guys are your guys and they can all produce at a certain extent, you have yourself a threatening group there. You also have someone like Caden Stearns, who isn't probably the biggest name out there. He only played 1 game last season, and he has not necessarily been able to play as much as you'd probably like, but someone who has flashed a lot that I really hope can stay healthy this year, because, again, with some uncertainty surrounding the secondary, I would love to see Caden Stearns be able to play an entire season and put together those flashes into a full year's worth of game tape. I think the sky is the limit for his potential. He just has to stay on the football field. I don't know what that looks like going forward right now, and if Denver's going to potentially give up on him because of his injury history, but I hope he can stay healthy and he can continue to find that success, because he's someone that I think is worth keeping an eye on, especially, like I said, with the conversation surrounding who is it behind PS2. As for my overall thoughts on Denver, though, this is a defense that, with some decent turnover and some intriguing returning players from injury or whatever it may be, or just guys that didn't get to play as much as you'd hope for last season, and on top of that with some additions as well, compared to the rest of the division, you probably have the least amount of household names on them, but there's talent that is probably yet to be discovered by the fans outside of Denver, I guess you could say. And as someone that obviously loves to just watch the entire league, I love diving into these teams and finding those gems that are not necessarily household names, but were extremely productive, but probably only known to the fans of their favorite team. So this is an underdog team that I think could make some noise. Less volatile, in my opinion, than with the way LA is kind of shaping up to be, because again, there's a lot of not only do you have a lot of name talent over there, but you also have just so much pressure with all that talent and underperforming, and now Jim Harbaugh is coming in. The pressure is mounting, and I think the floor could get so ugly over there if it doesn't go well. Whereas with Denver, they're on the track to kind of finding out what their identity is now post Chubb and Von Miller. Obviously something I feel like they've been trying to figure out for the last handful of years now, and with those young pass rushers on the outside there and a couple of other young and up-and-coming names, PS2 kind of taking over as the big name on this defense, this is a defense that I think could surprise. It just comes down to obviously where their guys get to, but also how the offense fares opposite of them, and that is something that is kind of concerning me here with this number 3 team, and also the team that I'm moving into at number 2. Now at the number 2 spot, I'm sure Raiders fans, you're going to have a lot to say about this, because I'm sure you feel you have an argument for the best defense in the AFC West. But like I said, with Denver, offensively, if things go south, it can get tough for your defense. You see great defenses start to burn out towards the tail end of the season because the offense is just in kind of a spot. And I am not sold on the quarterback position right now in Las Vegas. And that is kind of why it prevents me from really want to push this defense to the moon. But I will say this. The Raiders are extremely talented. They're young, and they've got guys behind their guys that honestly, if they get the opportunity, could run and grab that opportunity and ultimately wind up making them one of the deeper defenses in this division here. When you look at what they did in the second half of last season, and that includes some really tough games against division rivals and against just other opponents as well, this is a group that when you look at everyone's when were they drafted card, it's pretty much basically a group of guys from the last 3 or 4 drafts at the absolute latest here. You couple that with some big additions in the offseason, and I think that this is a team who finished 9th in points per game allowed last season and was rated in the top 16 at number 12 in the NFL against the pass. My biggest concerns really about this unit are just, is the offense going to hold it back? But I love what this defense is shaping out to be. When you look at their biggest addition, who in his career, 355 tackles, 43 tackles for loss, 20.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, an interception, and 19 passes defensed with 0 games missed since 2020, Christian Wilkins could help take this defense to that next level. And I mean that wholeheartedly. I'm not a Raiders fan, not at all, but he is a guy with Max Crosby on that defensive front. You have now a 1-2 punch that defenses are going to have to sit there and try to figure out. Wilkins is coming off of a career year where now that Aaron Donald has retired, he's one of those guys on the defensive line that you look at and go, that's probably one of the best guys in the league doing what he's doing right now. And I think he presents a massive issue now for defenses to try to account for, because before it was like Max Crosby is the guy, deal with him and you might be able to handle this defensive front over in Las Vegas. But with Christian Wilkins now you have 2 guys that are amongst the best at what they do in the league on the same defensive front. And I know defenses are going to be shaking in their boots shaking in their boots trying to figure out how to deal with that. You also have some draftees that I'm really looking forward to seeing here. Linebacker Tommy Eichenberg. He was one of my favorite draft prospects coming out of this offseason. And when you look at his tape from 2022 at Ohio State, 100 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, couple of sacks as well, you'd know why. To get him later in the draft the way you did, he's someone that I think could wind up surprising some people with just how good he is at what he does. Really excited to see him. And you also have some young guys like Decamarion Richardson, MJ Devonshire, Trey Taylor, young guys in the secondary. Curious to see how they all do. But you have a fairly young secondary already that is getting even younger here. A very big reliance on young guys in Las Vegas as far as the secondary is concerned, and I'm curious to see how some of those guys end up performing as well. As far as guys that I'm also looking at that played in limited amounts last year, you have a decent group of guys coming from the draft last season that I'm curious to see how they do being able to play more and getting some more reps in here. When you look at some of the guys from last year's draft, you have defensive tackle Byron Young, you have linebacker Amari Burney, you also have Tyree Wilson, who's been playing behind, a first round draft pick. Played in 17 games, didn't start a single game though. These are some guys that I think with more playing time could wind up shining in this defense as well. So I think there's a lot of potential upside that you're working with in Las Vegas. The core of this unit remained intact this offseason. You did lose some guys like Amik Robertson and Bilal Nichols, Jerry Tillery, but not anyone that I'm sitting there going, man, oh man, how are the Raiders going to sit here and wind up replacing some of the production that they lost from these guys here? I think Christian Wilkins makes up for anything you lost on the defensive line and then some, and that's being very, very subtle about it. And I do think that with a young, feisty group that you have in the secondary, there's someone that's probably going to be able to step up and replace Amik Robertson there. And I look at a guy like Jack Jones, who I think could wind up being a boon for this defense because he loves playing in this coaching staff here. So with that, if you just tighten up on third down, get a little bit tighter in the red zone here, this is going to be a unit that I think is going to give a lot of teams problems. And again, my biggest concern really just is the quarterback spot and what this offense is going to look like post a Josh Jacobs that was looking to get paid. And on top of that, you don't have a real answer at quarterback here. So those are my 2 biggest concerns. And when your biggest concerns are not even on that side of the ball, you're in a good spot defensively. And of course, at number 1, if it's not the Chiefs, who else would it be? Listen, For a lot of the things that I just said about the Raiders, you can also apply to the Chiefs, but they have the benefit of a fantastic all-world quarterback in Patrick Mahomes leading their offense on the other side, that no matter what's kind of going on over there, you can trust that Patrick Mahomes is going to get your offense into the end zone a few times at the very least and help you put away a team. Now, Spagnuolo is going to go down as arguably one of the greatest defensive minds, I think, to have ever played football when it's all said and done here, because what he has been doing with Kansas City the last few years has just been unbelievable. But this was one of the youngest and most inexperienced defenses going into last season, and they wound up going back-to-back Super Bowl victories despite that. And once again, it's basically the same situation. It doesn't really change. You have 7 projected starters per hour, lads, that were drafted only within the last 3 years. On top of that, you have 10 more players that you can name that are listed as second stringers that you could say the exact same thing about, drafted within the last 3 years. This is a extremely young but talented defense, and Kansas City has really, I will say, because there is some luck to drafting players. Obviously, there's a lot of scouting and everything that goes into it, but you also do have to get lucky with some guys as well. And they sure as hell have in having a lot of their draft picks hit and be able to compete and be able to produce for this defense here. And again, having the best quarterback on the other side of the football only makes it easier for a lot of those young guys. Now, when you look at the defense as far as changes go, there's not a lot, but it's 2 glaring big holes. L'Jarius Sneed being the biggest one. You also have Willie Gay Jr., who departed as well. Now, Sneed's obviously going to be the toughest replacement of these 2 guys here. You have Nazeeh Johnson, and you also have Jalen Watson as well right now that are currently listed as like the front runners to play opposite of Trent McDuffie, the All-Pro, who got crowned this past season. Great performance on his part last year. But that is probably, and it's a concern, but having Trent McDuffie there and Jalen Watson, who's done a really good job for a 7th round pick a couple of years ago to step in the way he has, like, I'm not too worried about it at this current moment here. It's one of those things where you still have an all-pro corner is what I'm trying to say, that is leading your secondary. And you do have some guys that are experienced at the top of your defense as well to help bail those guys out should they make mistakes. That I'm not super pressed about it, given the amount of talent that is also surrounding them on defense as well. With the linebacking room, yes, you lost Willie Gay. And going into last year, I said this, and I'll reiterate it again because I think it still rings true. This is arguably the deepest linebacker room in the NFL right now. When you look at who they have, and yes, this is minus Willie Gay now, you still have Drew Tranquill, you still have Nick Bolton, who missed a significant portion of last season, and you still have Leo Chenal as well on the roster. I'm not really too worried about them dealing with the loss of Willie Gay Jr. Nick Bolton missed 9 games in total last season, so him not even being in that group, and they were still as good as they were, him coming in healthy should be great for this defense here. And then, of course, you also have like a guy like Charles Omenihu on the defensive front. When you look at what he did, he missed the first 6 games last season and then obviously missed the Super Bowl as well. I don't know necessarily how far along he is in terms of his injury recovery right now, but when you see what he did from week 12 on, where he was notching a sack every single week, he integrated himself so well into this defense once he got rolling. You have such a threatening unit. And I mean, you're talking about pairing him up with Chris Jones, Derek Nandi, and George Karlaftis on that defensive front. I mean, you have a lot of people to deal with on the defensive front, and I don't really know how offenses are going to deal with this. I'm really excited because George Karlaftis is one of those guys that I think is just getting better and better every single year. Mike Dana you have in the fold as well. Chris Jones obviously being back is huge, and once Charles Omenihu rejoins the frame, and you still have a first-round pick last year in Felix Anuduke-Uzomah, who has not really had to do a lot because there's so much talent in front of him. This group is deep, and they are extremely young, and they're only getting better with age. They are aging like wine. So if you are anyone that is not a Chiefs fan, you're probably vomiting all over the place right now as I sit here and gush about how good this defense is. But when my genuine concern really of this defense is just who's playing opposite of Trent McDuffie, I hate to say it, but it's the Chiefs. at the top, and I'm having a really hard time of arguing it not being them. And again, especially when you have the best quarterback in the world on the opposite side of the ball as well, you're in a really good spot right now if you're Kansas City. This is a top 10 red zone defense last year, second in points per game allowed. They're the fifth best passing defense, second in total yards allowed last year, second most sacks, the best sack rate. The list goes on. I have a lot of different stats on here that they were sitting somewhere in the top 10 and if not the top 5 of. So it's the Chiefs at the top. Unfortunately, for those of you that aren't Chiefs fans, for those of you that are Chiefs fans, that three-peat's looking real good right now. So I'll give you guys that. But those are my rankings for the AFC West defenses. Let me know in the comment section down below. Again, what do you agree and disagree with? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Feel free to discuss. But that is it for me, as always. If you made it to the end, greatly appreciated. I'll catch you all next time. Have a good one.